So first of all, I just want to take a dean's privilege for a moment and say how incredibly proud I am of the presentation summit. Yes, so the work that you had to do in addition to work, family, school, and then this on your plate as well. Thank you for putting that extra time in, and I've learned a lot from each of you. And also dean's privilege, I was talking to some of you. We actually have a lifelong learning program for attorneys and others who might be interested in delving deeper into some of these issues. I know this summer AI in the law is available, and you can find that stuff on our website because it is our future. So
July 1st, AI in the law starts, and it's being taught by a woman who wrote the book on some of these things. So there you go.
So I did not write the book on any of this. And I'm a poor substitute for who we hoped would be here, which is Drew Lieber. And Drew Lieber is one of the founders of California Institute for Technology and Democracy, cited. The reason why Drew couldn't be here, even though he's very interested, is because they're spending a lot of time trying to get some bills through the California Assembly, and it's the height of that season right now. So he extends his apologies, and I am standing in for him, but not nearly with the expertise and probably passion he would bring to this. So obviously, if we're talking about AI and the future of democracy, we could have an entire conference just dedicated to that particular issue. So I'm just going to focus on one particular issue, and that's going to be the idea of deepfakes. I do want to focus, or at least raise the idea, and perhaps we can talk about it more during the panel presentation, which is there's actually a lot of ways that AI is positively affecting government and governance. We don't talk about that enough, but we could certainly bring up some of those ways this afternoon as part of the panel. So, most of you are probably familiar with the audio deepfake that was sent out in New Hampshire as part of the primary, encouraging Democratic voters not to waste their vote and participate in the primary for President Biden. It was done by a political operative. It was very easy. It was very authentic, and it was really scary. So a robocall was sent out. That's a deep fake. It's synthetic media that allows someone to mimic or create the likeness of someone else, and it's misleading. So one of the things that's said about deep fakes or AI is that none of this is new. As you guys have talked about, technology comes and goes in spurts. None of what's happening right now is new. Disinformation in elections have always existed. But what AI can do is makes the scale, scope, sophistication, and speed of what's happening that much bigger. So the impact is that much bigger. So the dangers of AI are certainly being recognized. The media has been talking about it quite a bit. People are well versed in the potential, and the potential for AI use in elections goes beyond deep fakes. AI use in trolling the voter registration and attempting to purge voters using technology like that is part of it. Georgia just passed something related to that. But I'm not going to get into some of those particular issues. I'm going to focus on deep fakes. So it's not as if we're not aware of the problem. 80% of Americans, essentially, regardless of political affiliation, are worried about the use of deep fakes in elections. So it's probably the one issue we're not polarized on. Is, deep fakes are a problem. So this seems like a pretty significant issue. Media is talking about it. American public knows about it. So what do we think about doing? We think about, well, how can we legislate a solution? So there are plenty attempts to legislate a solution. both at the federal level and at the state level. And I'm going to talk about not so much these particular pieces of legislation. None of them have been passed yet. And even if they were passed, they're not going to be part of the 2024 election cycle. Most of them wouldn't even go into effect until 2025. But I do want to talk about what some of these do, and then what are the potential obstacles to having them actually be a meaningful check, or what could potentially block them from being a meaningful check on the things that we're worried about. So the ones that you see at the top are actually all at the federal level, and the ones that you see at the bottom are actually all at the state level. And these are all bills that have been introduced. As you can see from the top one, Deceptive Practices and Voter Intimidation Act of 2021 has been introduced in each Congress since 2021, but has not gotten any movement yet. So even though everyone knows it's a problem, there's definitely obstacles to getting legislation passed. But what does some of this legislation do? Unlike some of the things that Stephanie talked about, this legislation is specifically focused on election integrity. So I think you had a couple of election-related pieces of legislation on your slides, but these are all election integrity related. So there's other things regulating AI, but these are related to elections in particular. So they really focus on specific things. So one is about deep fakes that mislead voters about elections, about ballots, about election officials, and about those seeking elected office. And let me just distinguish between those two for a moment. Election officials, imagine a robocall imitating the voice of Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, the Secretary of State, indicating that certain dates or things had changed about the election. So election official deepfakes is as concerning as campaign or those seeking elected office. So there's concerns about it across the board. So one of the things is, well, let's require a warning or other labels that might be attached to a digitally altered deep fake, whether it's audio, video, or pictures. Another one is, for example, SB 1228 requires large social media companies to actually verify who large influential social media platforms, not the platform like Twitter, etc., X, but if you've got X number of followers, so you can impact a great number of people, they have to verify that you are a real person with a government-issued ID. So, and they have to put on your thing that you have been verified with a government-issued ID, or you have not, so that people reading your particular post know whether or not you're the person you say you are. And you can certainly see why that would be important through a national security lens. One of the things that we're really concerned about is foreign governments using AI and bots, etc., to influence voters in the United States. We already have examples of that happening in 2020, 2022, certainly it's happening now in 2024. So you can see the value of that kind of verification. Who's behind this? But each of these are going to run into a free speech problem. So let's talk about the free speech problem. So even if they pass, you can imagine that there's going to be litigation about their validity, either as applied or depending upon how they're written, due to vagueness or overbreath. So even if they're passed in 2025, who knows if litigation will even be ended by 2026. So it could be even longer as we struggle with this. So the question becomes, how can the government regulate deepfakes without chilling satire, political commentary, or artistic expression? Can the government compel individuals and entities to identify themselves? Can it compel a person or entity creating a deepfake to label it as altered? These three questions are at the heart of the First Amendment issues raised by the attempts to regulate deepfakes. They're not the only ones, but they're the ones we're going to talk about tonight. So let's quickly touch on 3: false statements, compelled speech, and anonymity. So, Oliver Wendell Holmes in 1919 issued a dissenting opinion in which he introduced to the American people the idea of the marketplace of ideas. So truth is going to rise, in a competition of ideas, truth will rise to the surface. And it was a dissenting opinion in 1919, but quickly became the major driving force behind First Amendment thinking. So you've got Oliver Wendell Holmes, 1919, Marketplace of Ideas. Legal scholars today raise questions about whether that's even a legitimate theory, but it still holds true. Because you can see in the United States v. M.L.S. in 2012 that they allude to this idea. So M.L.S. was about someone making false and misleading statements about their military service. There was a statute, a federal statute that said Stolen Valor Act, that you could get penalized if you were to lie about your military service. He did it in a public meeting, and then he fought it based on the First Amendment. And what they said was, some false statements are going to be inevitable. And that really, it's to have open, vigorous debate, we need to accept that false statements are going to be out there and a part of it. So they allude to and still keep holding on to this idea of marketplace of ideas.
Did he win?
He did. But it was found to be unconstitutional. You'll be reading that this summer. Okay. So the other thing is this idea of labeling things. So now we're getting into compelled speech. Can the government compel you to say something? And so first came up, or at least the more modern idea, is when Jehovah's Witnesses challenged the idea of whether or not they had to do the Pledge of Allegiance. And the Supreme Court ultimately decided no. The government couldn't force them, compel them to speak. So then the question becomes, is labeling government compelled speech? Now we see labeling all the time, right? The cigarette pack, the bottle of beer. I don't smoke. I feel like I just identified vices there. But food labels, etc. So you know that there is a possibility of compelled speech in the commercial context. Is there compelled speech in the political context? And we hold political speech at a much higher and more reverent level than we do commercial speech. So it's somewhat untested. The other idea is anonymity. We have, and you've probably seen, laws that are being either enforced from the KKK time, when people are wearing masks, when they protest. There's certain states that actually have no masks law, and they're being enforced, and the question becomes, do you get to be anonymous when you speak? The Federalist Papers, the most famous example of anonymity in political speech. And so the Supreme Court has held that anonymity is a First Amendment part of speech. So what does it mean when they're requiring verification of users? Or anything like that in the context of AI. So now that we've seen and heard and talked about some of the election integrity things, we have this idea that misleading images or deep fakes are ones that, especially around election time, some of them have time frames, 60 days before an election, 120 days before election. Is this going to be something that violates one of those laws? If it's sent around, is it trying to influence the election? Well, President Trump, as a godly man, a Christian, etc., certainly something that is part of what is a piece of the campaign. What about this one? This is President Biden. He's fallen. Someone has altered the image in order to put diapers on him. And then this went around the internet and of course got lots and lots of likes. There's if you do fact checks, you'll see the original photo that this was created off of. Another one, AI images that were being sent around with former President Trump with groups of African Americans. Again, edited, you can see, you can't quite see it all the way, but there is a fake sign on one of them. Again, trying to influence the election, arguably trying to say he's got support among African Americans. Certainly that's something that we've heard a lot about in the context of the election. This, obviously defamation could be used on this one. Took a image of President Biden reading the outside of his shirt and altered it to look like President Biden was actually fondling a boy. So again, is this something that could violate any of those laws? But more importantly is where we end, which is we've spent a lot of time today talking about AI and the dangers of AI. We spent, Melinda did a great piece on trust, and this is what they call the liar's dividend. The more we talk about AI, deep fakes, the mistrust that we have in those particular pieces, the more the wrongdoer can disclaim accurate facts. Fake news. That is an audio tape that was actually manipulated. We're hearing it, we heard it before AI became a large part of what we do, but now it's even easier for us not to trust anything we see, anything we hear, anything we watch. So what does that mean for the elections going forward? What can we trust? And I don't know if legislation can actually lead to the trust that we need for purposes of election integrity. So wanted to do a quick overview of deepfakes in elections and happy to take any questions or comments. Yeah.
Well, it's been going on for a long time, and in fact, the church committee here in 1975, they revealed that the CIA had a way of what they would do is go all around the world, and they would find in Guyana and Nepal, and they would plant an article that was an absolute lie, but it was in a public newspaper in Nepal. It may be just the local newspaper, smaller than what we have in Thousand Oaks, the little one, Acorn, you know,
Yeah.
which is a good deal.
No, it's good. I like more, yes.
They would plant that, and once it appears, then they encouraged other larger ones, larger sizes, to pick it up, because that's where a lot of places get their news. Well, it's here, so we'll just use it, and pretty soon it gets to the majors, and I'm old and forgot the British one that everybody has faith in.
There's
Guardian.
a British newspaper? Oh,
Yeah,
all right, Guardian.
then the Guardian, you know, everybody's carrying it. And everybody says, well, it's been vetted because it's been published elsewhere and vetted there. So they've been doing it for a long time, and they're doing it in spades now. The problem that I see is now that Citizens United has said that what corporations do is they fall under being B entities, people. So you can now have super PACs, and big money is going to speak and lie in the most sophisticated way, and you cannot do anything about it. I don't know that I want to do anything about it. I think that's, not to get political, I'm actually afraid of guns. But I don't think they should take anything away from anybody. If you shoot someone, you should get nailed for it. Likewise, you should have free speech. Everybody should be, with the exception of yelling rape and fire in a tiny enclosed. You know, there are a few exceptions, but it means we can't ask the government to think and moralize for us. We have to do it ourselves. And when you read something that says Hillary Clinton is peddling children out of a pizza parlor for their blood, you gotta know. Really? I know people who still believe that crap, pardon my French. But you gotta go, really?
Yeah. So one of the things that's happening now, and Rick Hasson has written a great book called Cheap Speech, is that back when the CIA was doing it, it was planting them in papers that people purchased, et cetera. Now, Russia was found to have created an online newspaper with all legitimate articles and ones that they specifically put in there. So when someone went to the website, and it was free, it wasn't behind a paywall, so if I want to Google to find out something and this free newspaper comes up that's online, I go there first. It's got lots of legit news that I recognize and then news that I don't. So you're right, the exact same thing is happening now. He talks about through the lens of cheap speech because everything that we think of as mainstream media is behind a paywall or is more challenging to get to. And why bother? I can get on X or Mastodon or wherever I want to go on YouTube and announce anything and anyone can have access to it. I can reach millions of people without the New York Times. And so cheap speech, how should we treat it differently, if at all? So First Amendment absolutism, lots of people in your camp. Here's an example that I give to students. We feel so strongly about the administration of justice that we will hold someone accountable if they lie in court, perjury. We'll hold attorneys accountable if they don't have candor to report. We will hold people liable if they lie to government officials in the course of an investigation. Yet we're nervous about holding people accountable in the context of election integrity. So if we're comfortable with holding people accountable when what they're doing is interfering with the administration of justice, why wouldn't we be just as comfortable holding them accountable when it goes to undermining the integrity of our elections?